welcome to Switched On IT. I'm Barry. You're watching the Power TV Australian show, Switched On IT. This is the show where we talk about all things IT. Now, we have Ray and Doug with us again today. Welcome, gentlemen. Today we are talking about technology with transport. Now, first of all, welcome, Doug.
G'day, Barry.
Doug Endersby from Sydney, and Ray Sidney Smith from Washington, D.C., I believe, this morning. Is that right?
You bet. How's it going?
Good. All right. Now, gentlemen, I'll turn this over to you now, and we'll have some discussion about technology and transport.
Terrific. Thanks, Barry. Yeah, we were discussing it before, and transport is continuing to change quite a bit because of the impact of technology, and I think everyone's heard of Uber and other ride-sharing services. But you know, their impact on business particularly, there's some real pros and cons in there, and we thought we'd discuss those today, and also look at the broader impact on the economy as these technologies come into play. So Ray, first of all, we'll talk about, we'll define the areas, and I think one of the things that we spoke about was ride sharing and you know, the car sharing space. So do you want to kick off with with the definitions to give us the scope of the discussion?
Sure, absolutely. So the idea here is that we have kind of two large umbrellas of transportation that have been upended in the recent years thanks to the proliferation of mobile technology, and that first being car sharing technology, that is not owning a vehicle but having vehicles available for you to rent on demand using your mobile phone. And so there have been apps like Zipcar and others that have come available. And then the other side to that is the idea of ride sharing, and these are basically taxi hailing applications, and most notably Uber, but there are several other of the major ones in the world, and we could talk about some of those. But this is the idea that instead of hailing a taxi cab or hailing a cab in your traditional way, as a New Yorker, our traditional way is to walk out onto the street and hold out an arm. I don't know about it in Australia, but the idea now is that you go into your mobile application, you either schedule or ad hoc choose to be picked up for livery services, and that car comes to you by geolocating your location, geolocating you based on your mobile location, and then they come pick you up and take you to your destination. Payments processed through the application, and the ride-sharing application or the ride-hailing application is paid by taking a portion that is being paid on to the driver.
Yeah. So I think I'd say most people have used a ride-sharing service. Tell us a little bit more about the car-sharing services and what you're seeing out there in terms of who's doing it and how it works.
Sure. So I think that a lot of people have, because of the proliferation of car sharing, I think we've seen a lot of people give up car ownership in urban settings, in major metropolitan areas where there are a lot of these cars available to them. They no longer need to own a vehicle because maybe they only use the vehicle to go grocery shopping, or if they need to run to a store like IKEA and do a larger shopping spree, so to speak, picking up some furniture and some smaller items, they can go ahead and get that kind of vehicle tailored to their needs. Or if they're going on a weekend vacation, they can, here in the U.S., I think it's about $80 per day, and that's a very inexpensive, weekend rental. You just go into the app and say, I want this car, and you're off to the races, and you can have your pick of vehicles. You can drive a little sporty Mini Cooper, or you can get a more reasonable Honda Civic, and you're off to the races. So there's a lot going on there. I think from a business context, what we really see is a lot of businesses deciding that they no longer need to have a fleet of vehicles available to them, because now you have these cars available to your staff. And so Zipcar, Zipcar is the one I know the most, but they have a business account level where you can now have your staff be underneath your account, and instead of having to have cars for all of your staff, just uses the fleet of vehicles available through the Zipcar application. So it's a very powerful platform for being able to reduce overhead that the business would otherwise have, whether it be a lease of vehicles or ownership of those vehicles. They could take those completely off the books now and just pay for the cost of using those services when they need to.
Mm. And certainly at Oz Hosting, we are a card-carrying member of that team. So we have there is a car-sharing service called GoGet in Australia, and there is a GoGet car that is parked right outside our building here in Surrey Hills. And so if any of us need to get out to the data centre, which is a good, if we were hiring a taxi or even an Uber, it's probably going to be a $50 or $60 journey one way. We can jump in one of those cars and book them right here from, just obviously from online booking portal. The car's then booked. The people here have got the swipe card to get into the car on the street, and off they go. And then they just, if it's getting low on fuel, they'll refuel the car, put it back in, and we'll pay something like $7 an hour for the use of the car. It's very, very inexpensive. Just to put that in perspective, parking out the front of this building, if you're just going to use metered parking, is $7 an hour. So if you were to bring your car in just because you were going to go out to the data centre, your car's going to pay $50 or $60 in parking. Well, if you need to get out to the data centre, you can hire the GoGet for less than half that cost. It's just that it makes absolutely no sense to have cars in a situation like that. And I'm sure many businesses are in the same circumstances. So it's makes all the sense in the world economically. Just on a personal level, I'd add, I was so excited when this car sharing service came out, and I said to my wife, I'm going to sell one of our cars. We're going to go down to having one car, and I'm sure if I called up GoGet and said, look, I'll put $2,000 as an upfront payment, but I want you to put one outside my house, I would have got one for sure. But and this is interesting, my wife just hated the idea that we weren't a two-car family and I would have to hire a car if she was using the car, or vice versa. And I couldn't get that over the line. So we're still a two-car family, and I think one of the cars, the big old Land Cruiser, probably does 2,000 kilometres a year. But we've got that second car. So in the work context, it was an absolute no-brainer, and on the domestic context, we hire cars when we're away, but we don't hire them around Sydney when perhaps we probably should. Have you had a similar experience, Ray?
I think it's definitely a... Yeah, I mean, I actually went car-free for 3 years. And so I actually took the plunge, and, living in a major metropolitan area, I thought, my car sits there. Why should I just leave my car just wasting away? So I decided to sell it and see if I can live car-free, and I did for 3 years. And only because life circumstances changed, and I moved to a place where I then needed a vehicle. I then bought a car, and now we are again a two-car family. But I think that if I lived yet again back in an area where I didn't need to worry about having, my car, I would easily go back to that. I mean, it's remarkably easy if you live, say, in the DC metro area to be able to do that.
Mm. Now that you're back in the world of car ownership, that then also opens the prospect that you could list your car as being available when you're not requiring it. So in Australia, we've got a service called Car Next Door, and that's just privately owned cars that people sign up to the service, and then they'll get, you know, some money back on, you know, they'll obviously get a share of the rental income when the car is hired out. Is that something that you would consider, or what's your feelings about that?
I'm a little bit particular about my vehicle, so I'm not quite sure I would want other people driving my car. But I can certainly see there's a program here called TURO, and it's the same thing. You can in essence lease a vehicle of, you know, someone nearby, and I've actually used that program for when I've been on vacation and needed a car, you know. So it's worked out really well, because you can find you know, everything from a you know, again, a Honda Civic, very reasonable car, or you can pick up a Mercedes class and get a very reasonable for, you know, a week's worth of driving, and so it's kind of fun to be able to drive different cars. I'm a bit of a car fan, so, you know, I like having and driving different vehicles. I'm that kind of guy who goes to the dealership on the weekends and maybe drives a couple different, you know, makes, you know, cars on the lot. And I just like, you know, I like testing out the different vehicles, and I'm a tech geek, right? So I love technology. Why would I not love cars too? And so yeah, so I love the idea of using something like Turo. I'm not quite sure I'm the forgiving type to put my car, you know, the moment someone scratched my vehicle, I would potentially, you know, be very upset. So I believe in bringing back things better than I left them, but I'm not sure everybody is that way, so I probably wouldn't put my car on there. How about you?
I'd consider it, but I'm the same as you. You know, I like to keep my cars in good condition, and yeah, I'd be pretty annoyed if I got it back and there's a scratch, and also it would be just the process of then having to, you know, put the claim through back to the company and take photos and send emails and probably have somebody deny that it was them, and just go through some, you know, some rigmarole to, you know, to deal with that scenario. So that would bother me. But it's interesting how the circumstances for people can change, and then these things become something that they have to consider. So, you know, I have a son who's a carpenter, and he's just been assigned to a new work site, which is only about 4 kilometres from our home, and it's in an inner city area where there really isn't a lot of car parking space. So for him to drive in his pickup, he's got a big sort of Mitsubishi Trojan diesel pickup. It's just not practical for him, and he doesn't need to have it there. You know, they've got all their tools on site. So he's now looking at this car, which is really new, and he's a young guy, and he's saying, well, I'm paying a lot for this car, and I'm not able to make any use of it. So he's looking at Car Next Door as a way of defraying his costs of having that car.
Yeah, and
so I think it's got some applications in that situation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see there being some business application here where if a business does own a fleet of vehicles and they are underutilized, this would be an opportunity to be able to use something like that to be able to offset the costs, right? Because you have a fleet of 10 vehicles, 5 of them are constantly sitting empty. Well, you know, go utilize those vehicles by putting them on these kinds of and see if they can't be brought up to a reasonable utilization rate and help cover costs.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are obviously considerations, but.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the other considerations that my son bumped into in this situation is that because it's a work vehicle, and it's 4-wheel drive, and it's the sort of vehicle that he would take camping and things like that. It's also manual. It's a 5-speed manual, and then all of a sudden he's now looking at that and going, well, you know, I mean, it's not like in Australia a lot of people, you know, do like manual cars and prefer them, and there's a lot of people that can drive manuals, but you've probably eliminated, 30 or 40% of the potential population because it's a manual car, and people just, there'll be people that just aren't comfortable with that.
Yeah, that would be a good 80% of the U.S. population, I imagine. Most people have automatic vehicles here in the States, and maybe 20% of the people in the States know how to drive a manual. I do like a good manual vehicle. I have an automatic. We have 2 automatics, but I would definitely enjoy a good manual drive here and there.
Yeah, no, they are good. Now let's have a discussion about the Uber and ride sharing and the business situation. So one of the things that I do like about using Uber is that you have the ability to put multiple credit cards on the service. So even though I use Uber quite a lot for business, in fact I'd use it mostly for business, my Uber account is a private Uber account, but I've just got my corporate credit card as one of the payment options. And so very simply, when I'm booking an Uber car, if it's business related, I just select that card. It's really easy to do in the app, and gee, that makes all your book work, very, very simple, because you're just not getting the 2 mixed up. Do you do a similar thing?
Yeah, and do they send you that email at the end of the month with your receipts? I think you can set it up. Maybe it's Lyft. I think it's Lyft. So we have Uber and Lyft are the 2 major competitors here in the States, and I believe, I can't remember which one it is, but I use both apps pretty frequently, and one of them sends me an email once a month with all of my stuff itemized, which is just fantastic, because I have it automated, so it forwards into my accountant and bookkeeper's notebook in Evernote. So I just don't even have to think about it, but it's just being done for me, and that is very, very helpful. And also the application has the ability for you to now put in Google Pay, so I can choose to pay with my corporate credit card, with a personal credit card, or if I want to shield my personal credit card, I can use Google Pay, which is the equivalent to Apple Pay for the Android platform. Yeah. And so you can just choose Google Pay and pay personally, and or select the corporate card and pay that way also. So very, very handy.
Yeah. And I think it's also, one of the things about that whole process is that it's just terrific not to have to reach into your wallet when you're getting into a car, when you're getting out of a car. There's not that sort of pull over, let's hand over the credit card and go through that whole process. And I think it's also considerably more secure, because I think one of the things that many of us are concerned about these days is as soon as you hand over your credit card, there is the potential it can be skimmed. And then, then you're going to find that you'll have some unauthorized payments on your credit card, and you have something to follow up, and it does happen. I've had a credit card reissued in the last 6 or 8 weeks, and clearly somewhere along the way it was skimmed and used to make some payments to it was actually payments purchasing advertising. So I'll be interested to see how all that plays out with the bank, but very, very, very secure and very easy to track your payments. Now, one of the other things that we talked about here was, there is the potential for driverless cars to become, quite mainstream. I think we all look at that and feel as though it's an inevitability. What changes do you think we might see from Uber or Lyft or Ola or any of the ride-sharing services as we shift towards driverless cars?
Yeah, I'll take a step back and just make a comment about the safety and security of using something like Uber's mobile payment, which is also, for people who don't carry cash. I don't know about there in Australia, but here in the United States, it's just not reasonable to carry cash anymore. There's I know people do it, but I don't. I never have cash on me, and so it's really, really helpful to not to have to worry about that. Which in at least taxis here in the United States, still a lot of them are cash businesses, and so it's ridiculous to me that they would require you to pay in cash. And so it's really to have the mobile ride-sharing application take care of payment, if there's a dispute about anything, it's right there in the application and it's documented, so you don't have to worry about too many issues in that regard. So I'm right with you there. I love the convenience and the security of that. On the side of driverless vehicles, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the mayor, Bill Peduto, was the first mayor in the United States to allow this Ubers, driverless cars. And so I have been watching the driverless cars drive around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the past couple of years. Maybe, I don't know, it's been a year and a half, 2 years or so. And I remember the first time I saw, they have a little bit of a radar, and it twirls above the vehicle, so it's a driverless car. And it's really remarkable. But I think your point, the point that you were implying, is that it's going to displace a huge number of drivers. I think we have about 750,000 taxi cab drivers, and I'm presuming that includes Uber drivers or doesn't include Uber drivers. I'm not sure, but we at least have 750,000 taxi cab drivers in this country, in the United States. And when the driverless vehicles come onto the market, both the trucking industry will be the first to take hold of this, and has already. But then right thereafter will be passenger vehicles. Will be kind of bloodletting two industries where a human once filled that role, and we will yet again have to do either workforce redevelopment of those people to provide them skills and resources to move industries, or we face the risk of falling into economic decline and falling in economic stature. So we have a big kind of a big challenge ahead of us. Technology is doing such amazing things for us, but at the same time, we need to take responsibility for the fact that it's going to disrupt people's livelihoods.
Yeah, that's very
owners,
true. It is. Yeah, it's a significant fork in the road, isn't it? Because with some very serious, far-reaching socioeconomic implications when you look at the transport sector generally, and transport is generally human-operated, and we're reaching a point where that's going to switch and become far less dominant. And I know in Australia, in the mining sector, for example, there are already many vehicles operating in mine sites that are completely automated, completely driverless. So it's going to become more and more prevalent. I think one of the other interesting, macroeconomic implications of driverless cars, not driverless cars, but the whole ride-sharing industry in Australia, is that with folks like Uber coming into the industry, previously 100% of the money pretty much that was spent on taxi fares in Australia, and I'd say it would have been an $8 to $10 billion industry 5 or 10 years ago. To the extent that these ride-sharing services come in, and they're foreign-owned, so we've got Ola coming in from India, we've got Uber already here from America. They're taking somewhere between 20 and 30% of the commission, or they're charging the driver 20 or 30% of the net revenue from the fare, and typically a lot of that just actually leaves the country. So if we were to compare where we are today with where we were 5 or 10 years ago, if that $10 billion industry in Australia is now $4 billion in the hands of Uber, then about $1 billion is being exported out of the nation that never happened before. And it's quite interesting that I think our governments have maybe not woken up to that, and also the ability for this industry to come in and largely flout the regulations that govern the taxi industry and just say they don't apply to us, was also something that was very surprising. Certainly in Australia, if you were driving a taxi, you had to buy some taxi plates, and taxi plates, I think at their peak, were about $400,000 to, just to buy the plate that you can then put on the car and then say that the car is a taxi. Now, none of those Uber cars have spent $400,000 on buying the right to operate what is essentially an alternative to the taxi service. And so, I think our government is now or various state governments have found themselves in the position of having to compensate owners of taxi plates for the fact that the only value in the taxi plate was the fact that the government was regulating the taxi industry in that way, and then decided that it wouldn't. And so, have you seen was there a similar circumstance in the United States in that respect?
Yeah, it's almost identical, except for the fact that Uber and Lyft are both headquartered here, so the tax implications are not necessarily the same. Although we have seen there's a ride station called Gett, Gett. They're Tel Aviv based, and so I don't know what the tax implications are there in terms of whether or not they are circumventing tax by I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, but it's a possibility that it is not up to par, and that's happening. But the same issues apply. Taxi cab commissions are not capable of regulating Uber and Lyft, and there's all those issues as well.
Yeah. Now, there's in the broad sort of discussion of transportation and how technology is enabling that to be changed. I'd just like to sort of introduce briefly the bicycle services that are operating. So in Australia, we've got O-Bike and Red Bike and a bunch of these other services, and certainly in areas like inner city areas, at times the footpaths and the parks can be just strewn with bicycles. It's terrific because you can book your ride on a bicycle. That will then unlock the locking apparatus on the rear wheel of the bike, and away you go, and you can leave the bike wherever you want to leave it. But it hasn't been I wouldn't say it's been an unequivocal success in certainly in Sydney. What's the experience that you've seen for that in the US?
Well, in multiple cities, every major city, we now have some kind of bike program and a public bike vehicle program, and some of them it's successes, some of them have lost money in operations, but I think all of them have started to kind of course correct and are stable. At least in the major cities that I frequent, they're great. You see a lot of people on them, which is good, and so that's been a positive. Yeah.
Okay. Look, I think it's interesting. Looking at it from a very top view, you look at what technology has done in transport over the last 10 years. It's massive fundamental changes to our need to have, to own motor vehicles, how we use motor vehicles, the flexibility that we are now offered, and I think for businesses generally, it's certainly given us some terrific cost savings. I'm not too sure that I would ever encourage one of our staff to jump on a bicycle to go to an appointment, because I'd be worried about the liability implications if they fall off. But certainly the use of GoGet and other car sharing services has fundamentally changed things for Oz Hosting.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I think it's really important for people to look at all of the options available to the business in terms of how staff can get around, and really look at the options available across the board and select the ones that are going to be the best, not only for reducing costs but also increasing options. So maybe the staff doesn't need to take 5 cars to go to lunch. They can all take an Uber instead and not have to worry about parking and driving inebriated or things of that nature. There are downstream benefits to working with these systems.
Absolutely, and Ray, I'm just getting a little worried you know too much about our business when you're talking about those things when we all go off to lunch on a Friday. But there are just so many benefits, and I think, Barry, have you got anything that you'd like to add to the discussion on this? Because I think we've covered a few bases here, but let me know what you think.
Yeah. Yes, that's a really interesting discussion. I think that in Australia we've seen some very interesting developments with Uber. One of the things that I discovered was that when I attempted to become an Uber driver myself, they wanted me to strip all of the signage on my car so that it didn't have Power TV all over it, because you can't have a corporate car that has signage on it as an Uber car, apparently.
Right.
So that was one interesting thing that I discovered. I think that Doug, do you think that Australia tends to be we like technology, but we're not an early adopter, really? Australians tend to be a little bit cautious in adopting technology. What do you think the difference is between the adoption between the US and Australia of things like ride sharing and driverless cars?
Well, I'd say, Barry, my experience, and I'm sort of harking back to, you know, some years ago when I was the sales and marketing director of Duracell for Australia, and we had some great stats on adoption rates of electronics, different technologies. And actually, one of the things about Australia is that it was a fabulous early adopter of technology and set world records in terms of, the household penetration of, VCRs and video cameras, of CD players, of microwave ovens, and so on and so forth. And I think it had a lot to do, we're a very highly urbanised nation. We very rapidly get exposed to new technologies, and particularly the socioeconomic factors where even sort of households in the bottom quartile were able to afford most of these new technologies as they were coming through. So the adoption rate in Australia has often been quite a lot higher when it's been measured by against other countries. But I'm probably going back a little bit in time. I just wonder, in terms of right now, what would be the adoption rate of things such as look at social media. What is the adoption rate of Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter per household in Australia compared to to other countries in probably the OECD would be where you would benchmark it. And to be honest, I'm not sure, but I don't think that we'd be sitting a long way behind the pack. I think we'd be pretty much up there with other OECD nations at the very least.
What's it like in the US, Ray?
It depends on where you live. In the urban metropolitan areas, you have much higher density of adoption of technologies, and then in more rural, suburban, and then more rural areas, you have far less. And I think that just ends up being, access to internet and infrastructure are lower in rural areas, and so they depend upon either landline-based internet access, if that's available, and not necessarily broadband internet in the regular sense of it, or satellite TV and internet, and that means when you're dealing with lower speeds, you're not gonna buy something that's gonna require high-speed internet and otherwise. So I think there's a rate of lower adoption there. Also, it's necessity. Do you need that? If you are living in a rural area and don't want or need access to that technology, you're not going to use it. So I think that's probably somewhat of the issue there. Okay. I did want to circle back to the ride sharing applications and some of the requirements that Uber and Lyft have. Just beware of insurance. I don't know about in Australia, but at least in the United States, a lot of people sign up for Uber to drive, and then they are kicked off their insurance because their insurance does not have a provision for driving a livery service. And so they'll say, oh, we found that you are driving for Uber, we won't insure you anymore. And in states where you have somewhat of a monopoly insurance, that can be very detrimental to someone who has a car who then can't get insurance.
Yeah, now on that question of regulation, Doug, in Australia, if you look at an industry like, for example, the drone industry, Australia is very highly regulated there, and I think probably more highly than the US. How do you think our over-regulated society is going to deal with driverless cars?
I think that is going to be something which probably is going to fall to the states in terms of a jurisdictional question. And well, I'd say if they're, I think we'd all give them a fail in terms of their ability to either enforce or create improved regulations for the ride-sharing business, vis-a-vis the taxi industry. So I don't really hold out a lot of hope that they're going to be effective at regulating that either. It will happen eventually, obviously, but I think it's going to take some time, and I think they need to be, much more on the front foot with that.
Okay, that's terrific. I think we might leave it there. That's been a really interesting discussion, and I think that with these emerging technologies and with the kind of impact that they're going to have on economies and on individuals in workplaces and things like that, I think this has been a very topical topic to talk about. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time today. We'll leave it there. This has been Barry for Switched On IT. Thank you, Ray, and thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Barry.
And we'll catch you both again next week.
Take care.
Cheerio.
All right, thanks, guys. This has been Barry for Switched On IT. We'll see you again next week.